about Xinjiang, we need to know the spread of terrorism and separatism and extremism in Xinjiang.
There hasn't been any terrorism in Xinjiang for the last 4 years.
Why? Because what the government did.
You've locked up people without rights and without recourse and without any redress and without the ability to challenge their own incarceration. You think that's a good way of doing things? We're talking about the detention in so-called training centres, which were first denied and then finally admitted by Beijing last year. The UN says people were sent there under the guise of counter-terrorism and de-extremism policies, which you've just mentioned, and amid extensive limitations on the exercise of fundamental rights in Xinjiang. Are you proud of that?
Let me make a point. Terrorism just do not come out of the vacuum. Terrorism is the result of a process, and the process is very much dominated by indoctrination and extremism, for example. In Xinjiang, there is no denying there is an increasing level of radicalization. Many families actually deny their kids the right to education, which in China is considered as an offense or a crime. No one in China has any right to deprive their kids the right to go to school.
It's happening in Hong Kong. The UN is expressing concerns about increasing practices of arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, absence of judicial oversight, and restrictions on the right to freedom of expression, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Quite a list, isn't it? Quite a list. Also the right to freedom of assembly and movement within what it calls an increasingly securitized environment. This is a catalogue of rights to which your government has formally signed up in binding international treaties and which it is now violating wholesale. And I'm asking you whether you're proud of all that.
2 points. First of all, the United Nations, generally speaking, is in line with what China has been doing over the past 4 decades or so.
It's not in line with the treatment in Xinjiang, as you well know.
More than 50 countries in the world support what the Chinese government is doing in Xinjiang in dealing with terrorism, extremism,
more than 50
and
of
the
your
separatism.
States who are hardly beacons of human rights.
Many of which are Muslim countries.
Let's be honest about
Many
this.
of these countries are Islamic
and many
countries,
of them are
Muslim
your client
countries.
states. You're proud that the UN
China
had to
has no
remind
client
you.
state at all in the world.
No, really. You're proud that the UN had to remind you that you have an obligation to respect and protect individual rights under the Universal Declaration?
Absolutely. Human rights are very, very important.
Yeah, why do you think they're reminding you of your international obligations? Because you're violating them wholesale in Xinjiang.
No, if you put it in international context, the United Nations keeps reminding the United States and many other developed countries of the rights that they fail to give to their people. That's on a routine basis.
We're not talking about the US. I know you want to evade it. I know it's embarrassing.
It's not invasion. You cannot talk about this in isolation
as
if that's...
We can absolutely talk about what China is doing in Xinjiang in isolations. Mr. Gao, one of the requests for information submitted to Beijing last month by 12 UN human rights rapporteurs was this. Please provide detailed information on the judicial oversight and control exercised by judges over persons placed in re-education facilities following charges under the counter-terrorism law. Let me make a bet with you. This request is never going to be answered by Beijing, is it?
Let's do this. I hope with my help and with other people's help, you can do an interview in Xinjiang. I can help you to arrange some of these interviews.
You're not answering my question. It's not because Beijing is not going to answer this because there's no judicial oversight over the 1 million or so Uyghurs in detention. Most of the inmates have neither been charged with nor convicted of any crime, nor been given any chance to challenge their incarceration, as I said earlier. And that's fair, and you're happy with all that?
No, I think you misquote the situation. Radicalization is a process. At different stages of radicalization, you need to come up with strategies to de-radicalize the population in Xinjiang, including, for example, what I emphasized for the record, denying any family's misbehavior of depriving their kids the right to go to school.
Thanks to leaked documents and despite considerable attempts at secrecy by Beijing, we now have massive amounts of detail about what these institutions are doing, including a leaked manual for officials running and operating these places. One of the documents that was released described detailed controls on each individual. The students should have a fixed bed position, a fixed queue position, a fixed classroom seat, and fixed station during skills work, strictly forbidden to be changed. You like this kind of repression? You support this kind of repression?
You may call it repression, or you may call it educational or training school teaching methods. If you go to a cadet school, for example, if you train for the UK military, you need to exercise a lot of disciplines.
It's hardly comparable, Mr. Gao. We've also seen Beijing's instruction to officials in these camps. Implement behavioural norms and discipline requirements for getting up, roll call, washing, going to the toilet, organising and housekeeping, eating, studying, sleeping, closing the door, and so forth. You're trying to build robots in Xinjiang?
No, what you read about reminds most of people of a training camp, of a training school.
No, it reminds people of concentration camps, Mr. Gao.
No.
It reminds people of concentration camps.
What will serve China to concentrate people up to, let's say, in using your number, 1 million or 2 million? This is not a concentration camp. As far as, based on my personal knowledge of my dealings with the Uighurs, brothers and sisters in Xinjiang, this is not what you are describing about.
You are violating...
This is a far cry from reality in Xinjiang.
Not according to the evidence seen by the UN and democratic governments around the world. These camps, let's call them concentration camps, they violate all basic rights and freedoms belonging to human beings under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which you are supposed to abide by.
No, I would say let China fight its war against terrorism. Let the British fight your war against terrorism, and let's don't confuse terrorism, extremism, and separatism with what you would call human rights or
and
democracy.
Even if one accepted your pretext, you have taken away every right that these have. You have illegally incarcerated these people without trial and without any chance for them to challenge that incarceration. That is illegal.
No, and
that doesn't meet your international obligations.
So I would say you are imposing your view of rule of law onto China. Let China have its own rule of law and deal with its own offences as it sees fits. We are not talking about Britain. We are not talking about the United States. We are talking about a sovereign government with legal rights to deal with the threats of terrorism and extremism and radicalization. That's the key in China. No one in China wants to be a victim of terrorism.
Mr. Gao, you're locking up
radicalization.
People, according to the documents, you're locking up people who harbour vague understandings, negative attitudes, or even feelings of resistance, carry out education transformation to ensure that results achieved. That's the instruction that Beijing gives. You're looking at people who harbour vague understandings. That's all they've ever done wrong. And for that, you put them in one of these camps and throw away the key.
So
you think that's okay. I think a lot of people, including the UN and human rights organizations, believes that you have forfeited the right to be a civilized country.
So you are quoting something as if it is from the Bible. No, this is not sacred things. This may not be verified already using your standard of journalism. I hope you'll be realistic.
It's been validated by considerably more eminent people than journalists.
I hope you will really verify this with your own journalistic standard.
You're telling me it's not true?
I don't think this is true, because what China is faced with is terrorism, radicalization, and separatism and extremism. That's the menace in China, which is also faced by many other countries in the world. Look at the bombing here in London. Look at the terrorist attack against innocent people. You really want to have this kind of terrorist tendencies prevail in your country or in Europe? We have a common task to do, to get united against the terrorism. And that's a challenge not faced by China alone. That's a challenge faced by mankind as a whole.